Hi.
Greetings. We're in Genesis chapter 31 now, reading verses 1 to 16. And this is the New King James Version.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm reading from the ESV. But we should mark the occasion. This is the 100th Genesis video.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, we'll give you a link that takes us back to the beginning of the sequence. And the first 15 videos being basically our own testimony as to how much the book impacted us when we first read it together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all this wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him, as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers, and to your family, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field, to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me, as before. But the God of my father has been with me, and you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father, and given them to me.
In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do.
Mm.
So one thing you notice is that the brothers
they've appeared.
Of the girls are mentioned for the first time.
Yeah. And so I think that just gives you, you thought it was a bad situation already, this family, but it just sort of enhances that it goes further than that.
Mm-hmm.
It extends to bad relations between his brother-in-laws.
The girls obviously want to go. They're not happy at home.
Yeah.
And they think they're being cheated out of their children's inheritance.
An occasion where they agree with one another.
Yeah.
And they're not fighting, they're in agreement. Their father has been taking advantage of them and of their husband. Mm-hmm.
I think the thing I wouldn't have noticed until I was looking at the divine names years ago and examining basically the whole Bible according to its designations for God.
Mm-hmm.
Look what this one has as a pattern. Yahweh doesn't occur except in verse 3.
Mm-hmm.
Then Yahweh, or the Lord, said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you.
Mm-hmm.
But when the participants in the story are talking about what's happening, how do they refer to?
They call him just God.
God, Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going on there?
And that's not just Laban, but the daughters and Jacob when they're talking about God.
So even though back in Genesis 9 you have the revelation that the line of Shem will be associated with the name of Yahweh,
Mm-hmm.
even these people who are of the line of Shem have already gotten away from calling him by what now is the covenant name of God.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, Yahweh said to Jacob, return to the land and
Yeah.
your kindred, and I will be with you. So that the name Yahweh is now associated with the covenant promises given to Abraham's line, which is now Jacob's line.
So when it's mentioned, it's the writer of the account who's telling the account that uses the name, but not the people, the participants.
And that's the pattern throughout all of these chapters, especially from chapters 37 onward, when you have Joseph in Egypt. The name of Yahweh disappears completely, except one reference in the mouth of Jacob on his deathbed. Well, the covenant promises are you might say, in abeyance. They're not canceled, but they're not felt to be real because the people are out of the land, and Yahweh is not appearing anymore. And that's the key. Yahweh is the God that appears and speaks directly to his prophets. Jacob is now in the royal line. He is the direct descendant of Abraham, who was a prophet. So all future prophets will come out of this line. Now that's something I don't think we Christians think enough about.
Yeah.
The revelation ceases when in the year 70 the temple is destroyed and the Jewish people are now in diaspora again. Revelation ceases, but also the name completely disappeared. It disappeared in the first exile because they felt they were out of favor with God. The covenant was not canceled, but postponed until the land was restored, the temple was restored.
One thing I noticed too was when he's talking about his situation, and he says God has been blessing me. Really, God has made sure that they're still wealthy. He's been behind him getting a big flock. But so I thought of that in connection with what we read just previously about his method of scheming to try and get good wages, and he's practicing a kind of strange pseudoscience to get the flocks. But here it makes it clear that wasn't what caused him to have flocks. It was God intervening every time Laban tried to change it. And if this kind of thing worked through the genes of the animals, it wouldn't work that quickly. So it's God that intervened and made sure that he would continue to be blessed.
This conviction Jacob now has about God's not permitting him to harm me. This is verse 7, right? But that doesn't mean that Jacob is spared pain and inconvenience. A lot he is.
Not, yeah.
Often, though, it has to do with his own choices. But God is not allowing the line to perish. But he is allowing them to suffer the consequences of some of their very unfit. Well, let's just say that the choices lack faith. They're often just human. Yeah. The human mind making its own calculations.
Yeah.
That happens to all of us, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a mix of faith and then insurance policies of trying to work it out just in case.
Yeah. The new title of God, 13, I am the God of Bethel. Again, that's not saying that God is localized and only lives at Bethel, which is the pagan way of thinking about it.
So is this because this is where he met with God? Yeah. And so he would recognize that kind of a statement. This is a dream, right, that he's having? Yeah. Because he says in 11, and the angel of God spoke to me. So it's really the angel of God that says, I am the God of Bethel.
Yeah, speaking as God. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a phenomenon throughout the Old Testament.
You might not have noticed, yeah.
Here's what Griffith Thomas has to say about this sequence. When we read of Jacob's plot against Laban, our hearts sink within us. We remember that this was done by a man who had been to Bethel, had seen angels, and heard the voice of God. We may not be surprised at Laban's deception, but for one who had met with God, to descend to the level of the worldling was indeed a deplorable revelation. Here are two men trying to outwit each other, and one of these two men is a professed believer in God. It's absolutely impossible to excuse and to exculpate Jacob. On no account was he warranted in following Laban's example, just as if it had been almost from the first. He was afraid to trust God with his affairs. He must take them into his own hands and use all kinds of unworthy means to bring about ends that were in themselves perfectly right and justifiable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, speeding up the process, as his mother obviously tried to do.
Yeah.
Started the ball rolling here.
Yeah. Thinking that because this is supposed to be the end, I've got to work it out so it will be the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's a promise, right? But
So-
that's not. I think this also makes you think in terms of the way the witnesses will take any character of the Bible and only try and picture them as doing right all the time.
Justify them.
Good
Just
all
the
the
words
time.
he uses, excuse or exculpate Jacob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they do. But did Jacob continue with them because they were good,
Jehovah?
pure worshippers? Yeah, what did I say?
Jacob.
Oh,
So-
sorry. Did God continue with Jacob and his family because they were pure worshippers?
Yeah.
Or was it because he'd made promises
Yeah.
and he was keeping them? So in spite of them, he continues to bless them.
And we see this corruption and compromise doesn't end with Jacob either. It just continues in the family, right to the end of Genesis and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
They're still compromising, and the relationship between Joseph and his brothers shows that
Yeah.
there's distrust on all sides.
Yeah.
But Joseph is the one that God uses, even though
Yeah.
he's not in the line of the Messiah, which in itself is interesting that Judah,
Mm-hmm.
who is more corrupt than his brother, is
Yeah.
the line of Messiah.
I think it highlights God's grace, but also our need for grace. Because there's always a mixed bag in us. There's always the moments, and when you're a witness, those moments you either just have to ignore them, deny them, put them out of your mind, or just go around feeling nervous all the time. And I think that's where they're at.
Stressed out.
They're stressed and nervous, and will I make it? They're always thinking about that rather than seeing the hand of God is one of grace, and just keep going, keep trying, believe in God, trust him, be grateful for his grace.
And even the personal faith of Jacob, even though we criticize him, and everybody should criticize him for these wrong choices, but still this faith, personal faith, not about an organization or a group. It's he's been with me.
Yeah.
Do we have that kind of personal faith if we're witnesses, that that God's commitment is to us as individuals?
Yeah.
I don't remember that being very strong
No,
in the
it
message.
was more as a group. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to again link to the first of the series in Genesis and the playlist in Genesis.
Right. So as we said at the beginning, the 15 videos at the beginning of the sequence are our own testimony as to the impact of the book of Genesis on us.
So it's like it's Genesis 10 greatest hits or something like
Something
that.
like
Or
that.
15.
Yeah, the first 15 videos, yeah.
Yeah.
And also the Genesis playlist. So we'll put the first of those 15 on your screen.
Yeah.
See you
Bye.
soon.